Так, чудово. Я думаю, що можемо розпочинати.
Добрий вечір.
Всім доброго дня.
Так, вітаємо всіх
вечір.
колеги. Ми починаємо наш вебінар. Одразу попросимо, поки мікрофони всі тримайте вимкнені. Так. Ми будемо робити запис, щоб наші всі колеги змогли подивитися цей вебінар. Ви потім зможете також додатково задати питання, написати в чаті. Можливо, у нас в кінці буде час ще додаткових питань для нашого гостя, але це ми потім подивимося. Ми зараз будемо йти більше по тих питаннях, які ви нас діслали завчасно, і будемо якраз опиратися саме на них. А в перекладі нам сьогодні буде допомагати Ірина. Переклад у нас відбувається синхронний, і виберіть для української мови, хто бажає, внизу бачите, там у нас намальований такий кружочок, виберіть українську мову. Хто бажає, може вибрати англійську, щоб чути це в оригіналі. Сьогодні в нас в гостях не просто відома людина, а науковець, який давно війшов в світову історію, людина мега видатна, яка створила, можна так сказати, полівагальну теорію, ту теорію, на яку опирається в своїй роботі багато спеціалістів з сфери не лише психічного здоров'я, тут можна також сміливо сказати, тому що і інші сфери опираються на цю теорію. І нам сьогодні випала така можливість і честь побути з цією людиною і поспілкуватися з нею, можна сказати, наживо за допомогою онлайн-сервісу. Ми передамо слово Стівену Порчесу, а потім вже перейдемо до питань і відповідей.
Well, thank you very much for such a lovely introduction. I want to tell you that, I'm on doing this podcast or webinar with you because of my deep concern for the people in Ukraine and the desire to be online, to express my support for the difficult times you're going through. It's very important to us in the United States to feel connected to those who are in, let's use the term, the front lines of trauma. And you're living it and experiencing it. And it's just heroic to observe this and to see the optimism and the passion really makes me feel very good to be part of this, to be helpful to you. So thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Дякуємо, Стівене. Для нас це дуже велика честь, що ви відгукнулися на наше запрошення. І нам це дуже ще також важливо, як підтримка від видатних науковців, підтримка нашого народу в той час, в якому ми наразі проживаємо. І я пропоную перейти все-таки до тих питань, які ми підготували завчасно. Перше питання у нас іде, яке дуже актуальне наразі для нас всіх: як можна застосовувати полівагальну теорію в психологічній реабілітації ветеранів?
Okay, the powerful and very important question. Polyvagal theory provides you with a very important perspective. It basically emphasizes that the physiological state of the client, of your patient, determines how they react to the world. And this includes how they react to your therapy. So if you want therapy to be effective, the physiological state of the individual cannot be in a state of threat. The body will just defend against the intervention or the therapy. So I view this therapy as having two pathways. First, we could call a passive pathway, and that is where the therapist works to try to create a context in which the body of the client can feel safe enough to give up its hypervigilance and its defenses. And the second pathway is the active pathway, and that's when you do your therapy. So in a way, all therapeutic strategies, whether they're mental health or even physical health related, are dependent upon features of the polyvagal theory. So it's like if you had a physical ailment and it needed to a surgical or a medical procedure, the reaction to that procedure is going to be different if your body's in a state of threat versus if you're welcoming to the intervention. When you're welcoming to an intervention, the body takes the cues of the intervention and works with it in a positive way of healing, mental or physical healing. The other important point of this question is that there really is no differentiation in our nervous system as it responds to cues of threat, whether the cues are psychological or whether it's a disease or a pathogen. Our body reacts to threat on all levels, and some of the features that it reacts, how it reacts, have similarity. And and you see this in your clients. They not only may have mental health features of PTSD or trauma, but they're going to have gut problems. They're going to have other types of physiological or medical problems. And this results in them being treated for the medical problem often, but the medical problem emerging in a different domain. In a sense, the body is in a state of threat. So polyvagal theory is in a way not only useful in the treatment of mental health, but it's very useful in understanding what chronic illness is and features like chronic pain.
Дякуємо. Наступне питання, яке у нас є: яка роль спілкування та соціальної підтримки у регулюванні нервової системи?
Okay, let's see. Oh, we need to introduce a term, and that term is neuroception. Neuroception is how our nervous system. Actually, some people have their microphones on. Could you request that? Okay. There's a term called neuroception, and this is what polyvagal identifies or determine, or it's a word for the theory. It's about the nervous system detecting cues of safety or cues of threat. So cues of safety shift our physiology reflexively without conscious awareness into a state of defense, and cues of safety often turn off those defenses. So visualize a crying baby and how the mother calms the baby by using a voice that is very prosodic, lots of intonation, and the baby stops crying, relaxes, and literally conforms to the mother's body and falls asleep. Now, social communication is the critical point here. It's not merely communication with words. It's social communication with cues of safety in the language. So the language, we think of language as words, but we need to think of the body interprets language on multiple levels, including intonation of voice. So when voices are like that mother's voice, prosodic, bodies relax. If you have a pet, like a dog or a cat or even a horse, how do you talk to that pet? You use a voice that is reassuring and calming. And that's because as we evolved as social mammals, certain frequencies that we use in vocalizations cue others that we're safe to come close to. So communication is really extremely important. I would use the word co-regulation, and I would use the word social communication to emphasize that there are cues of sociality in the intonation of our voice. And this is not necessarily the words we select, but it's how we vocalize those words are critical. So the point of it is communication is signaling. Signals are important to our nervous system. And as a therapist or as any human being, part of our goals in life is to try to understand what signals work. And the polyvagal theory gives you basically a dictionary, a glossary of signals that turn the body into an accessible individual in a physiological state of feeling safe.
Дякую. Наступне питання: як зменшити вплив стресу на організм, орієнтуючись на полівагальну теорію?
Well, let's start with the word stress. Okay, stress means different things to different people. through the lens of the polyvagal theory, we don't need the word stress, which we often attribute to something outside of our body. And we don't need the word anxiety, which we attribute to something inside our body. We can create operational definitions. This is the science perspective. And that operational definition is our physiological state supporting our homeostatic functions, health, growth, or restoration, or is our physiological state shifted to a state of defense or threat? So when we throw out the word or don't use the word stress and we don't use the word anxiety, we can start seeing the function of those physiological states. And now if we want the person to be in a physiological state that supports homeostatic function, health, growth, and restoration, we rapidly realize that when the body moves into that state of homeostatic function, then the person has the possibility to feel safe and to have many other emergent behavioral and psychological properties, including spontaneously feeling safe in the presence of another and engaging and going to that initial question, spontaneously co-regulating and socially communicating with another. So our sociality is dependent upon our physiological state. And if we use the word stress and instead of stress, we say disruption of homeostatic function, if our physiology is disrupted, we don't feel safe, and we don't have the capacity to co-regulate or to be co-regulated by another.
Дякуємо. Наступне питання. Як розуміння взаємодії трьох гілок нервової системи може допомогти в лікуванні різних захворювань?
Yeah, well, the three states in polyvagal theory are one, this ventral vagus, but you would not see it as a vagus. You'd see it as what emerges in behavior and in physiology. When the body is being regulated by this ventral vagal complex, people's voices have intonation, their faces are more exuberant, they're able to extract voice from background sounds. But what that enables the body to do is to keep the body out of states of defense. So we can start seeing that when we're in that state, we're not only social, but we're supporting the physiological systems that keep us healthy. So mental health, social health, and physical health become integrated. Now, when we move out of that state, we become mobilized. We take as the ventral vagal brake off our autonomic nervous system, and now we're giving permission to our body to be mobilized, to recruit efficiently the sympathetic nervous system. And the word efficient is important here, because if I have this container or constrainer, this calming system, I really can't run or fight really efficiently. So the system is triggered, is signaled, and removes that constraint. That's very adaptive, but it's metabolically costly. And this is projected in behavioral styles of highly activated. It could be very anxious. It could be very irritable and hypersensitive to the world, because when the body's in that state, it really lowers the threshold of many sensory systems to detect cues of threat. And in doing that, it disrupts the ability to extract cues of safety from the environment. We just can't even hear the intonation of voices because our body is retuned to hear predator sounds. If our physiology is locked into this state of high stress, high anxiety, high mobilization, we are literally using up our metabolic resources. And our nervous systems tend to be quite smart. And if we, in a sense, use too much, and we can use words like burnout or exhausted, the body has its own way of shutting us down. And that's to use this more ancient conservation system of the dorsal vagus. So people may pass out, they may have extreme periods of chronic fatigue, their body may be screaming that they can't fight anymore. They just have to literally collapse. So we can literally see this system sequentially moving down that ladder of this hierarchy. And therapeutic models try to move the person up the ladder so they start feeling safe with others and they can deal with it. Another kind of clue is if you are gone into this very low, the system of shutting down, the body doesn't like to be there. So it may start using signals to the person in the nervous system to do activities, because if you're highly mobile or do high-risk behaviors, you can't shut down. So you may see people who have had severe trauma history, severe adversity. You may see them doing high-risk behaviors so that their body keeps moving, because if they stop moving, they become vulnerable.
Дякую. Наступне питання щодо недоношених немовлят і процесу грудного годування. Чи правильно розуміється, що маючи недорозвинутість дихальної системи на початковому етапі розвитку, недоношені діти мають більшу здатність до тривожного стану в дорослому віці і певні складності в соціальному проявленні? Грудне годування закладає фундамент більш вдалого і досконалого процесу соціалізації і, відповідно, більшому відчуттю безпеки?
Yeah, this is really, it's a powerful question because it gets at the mechanisms through which the ventral vagal complex serves to enable humans as well as other social mammals to co-regulate. So let's talk about what is going on during the last trimester of pregnancy. And this is when the ventral vagus starts to develop itself, starts to be myelinated, and there's certain movements in the brainstem where the vagal control in the, let's say at the end of the first two trimesters, the vagal control is not ventral, it's still locked into dorsal. So basically that fetus is more like a reptile autonomically than it is like a mammal. But during that last trimester, the movement of the, what are called the cardioinhibitory, the vagal fibers that calm our heart down and make us more accessible to others, they start to move ventrally. Now, that movement ventrally during the last trimester is to an area that regulates the muscles of the face and head. It's the muscles that we use for vocalizing. We use the muscles of the middle ear so that we can extract human voice from background sound. We use the muscles around the upper part of the eye, the orbicularis oculi, to cue exuberance and happiness. So we use that ventral vagal complex, the linkage with these other cranial nerves, critically in terms of communicating our physiological state. And when we receive those cues, it also calms us down. So we have this, what I call a social engagement system. Now, with a preterm baby, that social engagement system is not mature sufficiently to enable the baby to function postpartumly like a full-term baby. Interestingly, all those structures involved in social interaction in that social engagement system are the structures that are involved in coordinating suck, swallow, breathe, and vocalize. So when we deal with the preterm baby, the survival mechanism really starts off, can the baby nurse? As the baby's suck, swallow, breathe is coordinated sufficiently. And that system also is a system linked to vocalizations. When a baby survives prematurity, they often do very well. They, in a sense, over the past 50 years, the ability to for preterm babies to survive has been greatly enhanced. And in fact, if we start looking at cognitive development of babies who are born prematurely, they're in a sense, if they're born after 32 weeks gestational age, they tend not to, basically they do very well. They're basically normal kids. What is forgotten in this trajectory of, let's say, normality is they forget about the social behavior, or at least the scientists or the clinician scientists have been basically mapping intellectual function, a little bit of motor function, but not really sociality. So you often find that parents of preterm babies describe their children, especially when those children become adolescents or young adults, they describe the children as being, quote, bright, but not having a clue about social interactions. And the issue on that is that this social engagement system hasn't been sufficiently exercised. Another part of the story is that, at least in the United States, prematurity has become a risk factor to being diagnosed with autism. So this whole notion of this dampen or dysfunctional social engagement system is being linked to that developmental trajectory. I was involved with a study with preterm babies in which they used a lot of social stimulation following birth, even when the baby was, I'd say, very, very small. So the mothers were there, they were singing to the baby, and the trajectory of that ventral vagal regulation was accelerated and made to look much more normal. So the issue is, and this is a historical strategy that has changed in many countries, especially the United States. When I started doing research on babies, it was in 1970, and preterm babies were often abandoned by their parents in hospitals. They became wards of the state, so that the parents lost interest. They would come to see the baby. They weren't allowed to touch the baby. They couldn't relate to the baby unless the baby didn't coo and didn't smile. And since that period of time, there's been remarkable research showing parents and physicians, nurses, and therapists the repertoire of even a preterm baby. So the parents start to understand that their baby had a personality, had uniquenesses. And then parents were invited into the nursery to spend time with it. And then they start to create relationships. And now the scenario is much, much more positive.
Дякую. Наступне питання. За яку стратегію поведінки людини відповідає центральна частина вагуса?
Okay, so we have to understand within polyvagal theory, the nerve itself, the nerve that goes from the brainstem to all these various organs and then is this bidirectional superhighway of neural connections. The nerve is not the critical part of the theory. The critical part of the theory is really the brainstem area that is regulating those pathways and receiving signals through those pathways. We tend to think of the vagus nerve as having, the word in English would be agency or executive function, as if it makes decisions. And it's merely just a wire. It's a wire connecting our brain with our organs, and it's a bidirectional wire. So the brainstem, this is located in the lower part of the brain, and the brainstem makes decisions on survival in general. And so that brainstem area does affect that our bodily organs. And that brainstem area is not really going from the brainstem down to the organs, but as the organs send information to the brainstem, that brainstem area basically projects information that affect our cortex. So when our brainstem reads our visceral organs as being in a more homeostatic state, it literally is projecting signals to our cortex and says, basically, you're safe, now think, solve problems, and socialize. But if the brainstem is reading our bodily systems as being under threat or challenge, then we become basically much more reptilian. We become much more survival oriented.
Дякую. Яка частина центральної нервової системи активізується в глибокій медитації?
It's a good question. So and I'm going to kind of reverse this for you, and that is, if one thinks of deep meditation as a state in which you give up all your defenses and you feel safe in, let's say, the connection with the universe or the world, you don't have to worry about what's going on behind you, you're not defensive and protecting yourself, then that state is certainly the state being regulated by the ventral vagus. So it is, but if your meditation leads you to a dissociative state in which your body is still tense, but your mind is someplace else, it's your body's in a state of defense. So it's a different state. So if I interpret deep meditation as this opening of the body and the comfort of a body not being under states of threat, it's certainly a ventral vagal state.
Дякую. Наступне цікаве питання. Французькі психоаналітики фрейдистської школи називають первертним типом характера такий, який не має фіксації на психічних кордонів особистості. Чи є якась гіпотеза полівагальної теорії щодо активності вагуса в перверненому стані?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but let's play with it. So if we're saying that someone doesn't have boundaries of the individual, if we focus on that and say, what is the physiological state from a polyvagal perspective in which one has both an awareness of self and the boundaries of one's own body? That, of course, requires the nervous system not to be in a state of threat. So it requires that ventral vagus to really be well developed and well regulatory. The real point here is when we are in states of threat, our body loses a degree of awareness of ourself and our boundaries, and also those of others. So I hope that comes close to the question.
Дякую. Які механізми зовнішнього впливу на роботу центральної вентральної системи вагуса розглядає полівагальна теорія? Яка частота або темп зміни звукових хвиль є стимулятором? Можливо, колір,
Ты
смак,
отстанешь от меня или нет?
дотик?
Yeah. Okay, so in polyvagal theory has focused more on frequencies and the bandwidth of the frequencies that can act as a potent signal to calming the body down. And this is actually dependent upon the physics of middle ear structures. So through evolution, the middle ear bones broke off the jawbone. In fact, this is how we can find or define a mammal in the fossil record. If the middle ear bones are detached, now that may sound like a very esoteric. That may sound like a very esoteric fact, but the real issue is with detached middle ear bones, mammals could hear frequencies higher than the frequencies that reptiles could hear through bone conduction. So what it enabled in evolution was for mammals to co-regulate, communicate, and cooperate with each other. So I'd spent a lot of time within polyvagal theory on understanding this frequency band, and it became a frequency band of social communication. And it's really the intonation of voices. It's a mother's lullaby, that frequency band. It's definable, and it's what's used in the intervention that I developed called the Safe and Sound Protocol. And what the Safe and Sound Protocol uses that frequency band defined by the physics of the middle ear structures. Literally, it's based on the resonant function and the transfer function, the resonance frequency and the transfer function of these middle ear structures. And what that enables us to understand is which frequencies are potent signals to our nervous system to calm it down. And again, it's very intuitive because we already know that. How does a mother calm her baby? How do you calm your pets? Why does it work with pets as well as babies? Well, the transfer function and the resonant function frequencies of the middle ear structures of cats, dogs, and horses overlaps with us. So they can hear the intonation of our voice. And just as it's calming for us, it's calming for them. So the mechanisms of external stimuli, of acoustic stimuli, to me become a very powerful way of sending signals of calmness and safety to the body. It's not the only portal, but it is a powerful one that co-evolved with mammals. So it not only was sucking, swallowing, and breathing part of our initial repertoire, but the ability to detect the intonation of vocalizations as a powerful signal was important. And I will go one step further. The vocalizations that we use, the intonation of vocalizations, are regulated by a vagal nerve, a part of the vagus as well. And functionally, when we use our voice, we are broadcasting our physiological state. So the evolutionary history or significance of this was that we could broadcast to those of our species whether we were safe to come close to or not. And if you have pets, this is what you're doing when you use a voice that has prosody. You're signaling the autonomic nervous system or the nervous system of that pet that proximity by you is not a threat. When we use our melodic voices to talk to our children, they feel the same way. But if we yell at someone or yell at our pet, we are using a signal that is not calming to their nervous system. And of course, when that ever occurs, when we get really upset and we basically broadcast our physiological state of being upset, it's a signal of threat to the other person. But we often justify it by saying it's what I'm saying that's important, not how I say it. But the real take-home message is it's not the words, it's how the words are vocalized that affect our body.
Дякую. Якщо ви стежите за практиками та інструментами ваших послідовників-психотерапевтів, поділіться, будь ласка, на вашу думку, ефективними і найкращими прийомами, які використовують психотерапевти, щоб повернути почуття безпеки. Особливо це нам актуально на тлі того, що фактори небезпеки, вибухи, теракти, повідомлення про смерті, хвороби, економічні проблеми нікуди не йдуть із життя людей. Як нам заспокоїти людей під час війни?
Thank you for actually bringing that up, because I've done some webinars to therapists in Ukraine, and one time they came out of the bomb shelter to see me because the internet was better outside the shelter. And I asked them, I said, what were you doing in the shelter? And they said, we were singing songs together. I said, what kind of songs? And they were patriotic. They were very, lots of intonation. And when I asked them, faces smiled. They were, in a sense, sharing this moment of interaction. And then what I did for the next few minutes was deconstruct what they were doing as an efficient and effective method of co-regulating their physiological states. They were using the whole social engagement system, they were co-regulating, and they were signaling each other's nervous systems that they were safe to be close to. So it's very important that we understand the language of our body, and that intonation of voice, facial expressivity, looking at a person, not turning away, gestures are powerful in shifting physiological state.
Дякую. Чи можливе лікування синдрому подразного кишківника, використовуючи полівагальну теорію?
I think irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel disease is easily explained through polyvagal theory, because it's when our body feels under life threat, the neuroregulation of the subdiaphragmatic organs, the gut, become dysfunctional. They don't support our health. So many individuals who have an adversity history have symptoms of irritable bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome. So it is a manifestation of the autonomic nervous system being in a state of threat. It's not something, again, the medical model is that if you have this disease or disorder, you treat the disease or disorder. Polyvagal theory says the disease is a symptom of a nervous system locked in a state of threat. And what that means is that cues of safety, calming the autonomic nervous system, should reverse irritable bowel syndrome. And there are practitioners who are using the safe and sound protocol to be helpful to individuals who have, in a sense, in those states, but not using that safe and sound protocol by itself, but using it or intertwining it with other forms of psychotherapy. The point is that irritable bowel syndrome is literally a powerful signal to the therapist that there is most likely a history of adversity in that individual's life. It doesn't mean that it's causal, it doesn't mean that it has to be there. There are other pathways. But in general, irritable bowel is the body is under a state of threat. Now, when I say the body is under a state of threat, often threat is not psychological. It could also be a physical threat, and the body still is in a state of threat, or it can be even through a pathogen. So the signaling of the body is what we're seeing. We're not inferring or guessing what the causality or the where the signal came from. So polyvagal theory says when you see this in your clients, you have a whole series of other questions of exploration with the client to kind of understand what that trajectory was.
Дякую. А в чому найкраще проявляються довготермінові наслідки почуття безпеки?
Well, the long term, I mean, there are therapies and research on attachment disorders. So, I mean, we can, an attachment or disordered attachment, secure attachment, all those could be retranslated within a polyvagal theory, in which saying that if our bodies feel safe enough to trust, who are we? And if our bodies haven't felt safe enough to trust, our nervous system is retuned to be defensive. And that defensiveness is not being, quote, a bad behavior. It's a survival behavior in an individual who didn't have an environment that was safe enough to trust another person. So in the world of trauma, we often see this whole notion of difficulty in trusting another. And you can say that could be based upon poor attachment. Now, the issue is, if the attachment figure was really the instrument of abuse, there's a very adaptive reason why there was no attachment. It was a survival related. So the answer is feeling safe is very important, and it enables the body to engage others and to co-regulate. And this important point of co-regulation, which I really haven't emphasized, we are not an isolated species. We are not by ourselves. We are born with a caregiver. We're born with a parent who we develop trust. We call it attachment. As we get older, we develop relationships with others based on trust. They become social bonds. They lead to marriage, and then you have children, and the whole cycle continues. And for some people, they have difficulty feeling safe enough to develop trust and bonds with other people, but they do extraordinarily well with their pets, with a dog or a horse. So we know that as a human, we need a social mammal to enable us to feel better, to co-regulate our physiology. When we start, in a sense, expecting people to regulate their own behavior, it's a real difficult challenge for virtually everyone. Those that do well with regulating their own behaviors often have visual images and memories of a history of co-regulation with a loved one. And many people who have difficulty engaging others, they kind of find a life and where they can get predictability, which is going to be a metaphor for safety and a surrogate or replacement for trust with objects. So we find that some people who like living with the computer, basically the predictability of objects enables their nervous system to function.
Дякую. Як швидко перемикатись між різними гілками вагуса, і чи можна цьому навчитися?
Oh, well, the optimal individual, the healthy person who has, let's say, the ability to co-regulate with others, but under certain situations needs to survive, recruit defenses. This is instantaneous. They can do it within a second. The body can start this massive shift. But the important part is not the shift from let's say, a safe ventral vagal state to a sympathetic mobilization fight-flight state. The real question is, when there is no longer a threat or a challenge, how rapidly does the system normalize itself? And that is the real question. And what we find out is, for people who have, let's say, good developmental histories, that ability to retract that ventral vagus to promote metabolic output, but also to calm down, is a part of their repertoire of resources, and we can even use terms like psychological and physiological flexibility, because that's really what it is. But if your nervous system's been challenged with threat, you can never go into a fully ventral vagal state, because if you're there, you're giving up your defenses, and that becomes too much of a risk. So they can become more likely to become destabilized. And so the issue, and this is a very personal reaching out to those of you who are in situations where there are explosions and challenges, co-regulation and working with each other to calm each other's nervous system is the history of human civilization. So don't expect that you can regulate yourself under these things. You need to literally be, I would say, self-compassionate, and says understand that your body needs to co-regulate. You need others in your life to help regulate the disruptions.
Дякую. Як полівагальну теорію можна застосовувати в лікуванні ПТСР?
Well, the theory again provides, it provides an explanation, but it also changes the defining terms used for the diagnosis. So PTSD, like many other diagnoses, tend to be observables. And PTSD is often an event-related diagnosis. Polyvagal theory says events are important, but more important is the response to the event. So polyvagal theory says, okay, we have people who are diagnosed as PTSD, but all of them may not have experienced the physiological disruption of the events in the same way. And that's where polyvagal theory comes in. If the physiology, the neural regulation, has been disrupted by the traumatic events, by the adversity, then the signals of safety need to be incorporated in the nervous system. The nervous system has to give up its hypervigilance. And interestingly, there's some really powerful interventions that are now being used. One is called stellate ganglia blockade. And what that really is, they inject into the sympathetic branches along the neck, going up high into the system. They inject a neural blockade. Basically, they turn off the sympathetic nervous system on one side of the body. And when they do that, for those individuals who are so hypervigilant and so tightly wrapped from their traumas, the body just opens up. And in a sense, it says to the autonomic nervous system, the vagus can come back on. You can start calming down. And so for some individuals, they had remarkable effects. And these effects were triggered by one injection, and that injection was only a temporary blockade of the sympathetic nervous system. So it downregulates sympathetics, and that creates the platform for the system to normalize itself with more ventral vagal function.
Дякую. Які поради щодо збереження здоров'я ви можете дати українцям?
Preserving health, I would say the secret of preserving health is through sociality, is through social interaction, is through trusting others. If we think of our bodies as a resource, our nervous system as a resource, and if we're under chronic threat, that resource is being depleted. So in a functional way, we seek social nourishment. And when we use terms like burnout in medical environments or mental health environments, what we really are saying is we're not getting anything back. We're not getting sufficient co-regulation from the work we're doing. And this requires that even practitioners in these very difficult times understand that their nervous systems need cues of safety and cooperation and co-regulation.
Дякую. На що варто звернути більше уваги українським психологам і психотерапевтам у роботі з людьми?
Well, the attention, I think polyvagal theory says people are signaling to you their physiological state all the time. But as trained therapists, there's some of the signals you haven't been trained to look for. So one, of course, is the intonation of your client's voice, and to kind of start understanding that the intonation of the voice is really telling you about their physiological state. The other one is to look at the expressivity or lack of expressivity in the upper part of their face, because if your face is flat, that's a face that is not having neural input from that ventral vagal area. So people who have trauma histories, often their faces are very flat. You can also ask simple questions like, are you sound sensitive? Do sounds bother you? And a lot of your clients will start saying, yeah. And then you can ask, did this always occur? And they'll say, probably no, but have you noticed it recently? Yes. And what that is saying is that the nervous system is locked into a state of threat, because when it does, when you're in a state of threat, the middle ear muscles change their setting. They lose their tone. And what that does, it changes the tension on the eardrum. And now lower frequency predator or danger sounds start to come in through the ear, and human voice starts to be dampened. So people will say, I have difficulty hearing human voices, but I hear the background noises really well. These are telling you about their physiological state. So we can use our knowledge of polyvagal theory, and especially how threats and moving into a state of threat dampens that whole social engagement system. We can see how it's projected in facial expressivity, voices, and how it affects sensory apparatus, including hypersensitivities to sound and even hypersensitivity to visual stimuli, yet difficulty in understanding words, what people are saying. So we can learn a lot by asking some very simple questions, and that profile becomes a profile of a person who's in a state of threat. You can also look at muscle tone and how they hold their body, because if they're protecting or they're in a state of threat.
Дякую. Ще одне питання було пов'язано з тим, що наразі існує багато теорій, спрямованих на заперечення полівагальної теорії, і наша колега хотіла дізнатися погляди Стівена на це, на існування самої теорії, але Стівен був вже відповів, надіслали статтю, одну з останніх статей, де він це розглядає. Можливо, ще щось додати бажає?
I would like to add something, because the real criticism, when people, actually I looked at the link that was sent, and that's written by a person who doesn't know basic science anyway. It's basically using social media to basically reconfirm a misstatement. So if the person reads the basic literature, they'll realize that the criticisms are not based on the polyvagal theory, they're based on something else. So the criticisms have literally attributed statements to the polyvagal theory that the polyvagal theory hasn't made, and then criticize those statements. So in science and theory, we call this creating a straw man argument. So where people say that the theory does this, and it's obvious that this is wrong, therefore the theory is wrong. Well, the theory doesn't make those statements. It never did. And this has been in published papers as well. So whenever I see criticisms based upon two people's statement, one who actually has done research but totally misinterpreted my work, and the other person who goes on social media saying that this other person disproves the theory, I basically, I literally shake my head and say, well, why doesn't anyone read the original literature? And then you'd realize that what they were saying had no documentation. So it's not that the theory is perfect, but the criticisms of the theory that these individuals have made are not based upon what the theory states.
Дякую. Ми пройшлися по основних питаннях, які в нас були завчасно надіслані, але в нас є ще декілька питань в чаті. Чи міг би Стівен на них відповісти?
Only if they were in English.
Я тоді зачитаю. Можливо, є інструменти самопомощі, нема можливості корегуляції в рамках вашої теорії для зменшення гіперзбудження нервової системи у військових, що знаходяться на передовій, тобто на лінії самі зіткнення, і не можуть спати днями.
Yeah, well, let's start with the issue of the symptom, and that is if you can't sleep well, the person's telling you their body can't give up its vigilance. It's still under a state of threat. What's coming to mind to me at the moment is the history of humanity, and the history of humanity when humans didn't have, let's say, safe homes, they were living more out in the wild or in tents. They often there's a linkage between the domestication of dogs and the civilization of humanity. So I'm actually wondering whether embedding dogs with the military would be helpful in enabling soldiers to sleep better. So in a sense, the dog becomes the organism that is hypervigilant and not the soldier. The physiology of being under threat is going to affect all attributes of our body. It's just not going to allow the body to relax. And sleep, of course, when we sleep, we give up our defenses. And if you're in the military and you're in the front lines, sleeping is not compatible with your survival. And my suggestion is the toolkit there might be to embed dogs or pets in the to enable, let's say, barracks to have dogs, and then people might be able. I'm not even sure about it, but it's a possibility. The other part is to make sure that even in conditions of warfare, that the troops have opportunities to be in situations that are safe enough to give up their hypervigilance and to co-regulate. And one of their basic tools, any type of cooperative behavior, it could be singing or it could be game playing, on any level is helpful in co-regulating physiology. And so we have to also remember, and we watch children playing, the reciprocity of interactions is sending mutual cues that we're being seen and we're being heard, and that we can co-regulate each other.
Дякую. Наступне питання. Наскільки дієві дихальні вправи для регуляції?
Well, breathing is this wonderful portal basically into our autonomic nervous system, because breathing has a voluntary component to it. We breathe spontaneously, but we can override it by breath work, by controlling our inhalations and exhalations. The linkage with polyvagal theory is that during exhalation, the vagus becomes very powerful in calming us down. So with slow exhalation, the vagus is literally doing its work. It's actually inhibiting our heart's pacemaker. So a long, slow exhalation is calming, while a long, slow inhalation is literally blocking the vagal impact on our heart, so our heart rate goes up. So we have access. And again, various forms of yoga breathing has really, I would say, exploited in a very positive way this mechanism, and using it in multiple directions. So you can calm the body, but you also can get people physiologically activated by shifting the ratio of inhalation to exhalation.
Дякую. Наступне питання. Як застосовувати полівагальну теорію, коли ситуація травмуюча, ситуація небезпеки продовжується, тобто безпеки, по суті, немає, і невідомо, коли вона буде, так як наразі відбувається у нас в країні?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that individuals do it is that the people who do, I would say, who do well under those very difficult conditions are people who have very strong, powerful visualizations of positive relationships in their history. So even though their bodies in the present time are under a state of threat, they can take a visualization of a memory, and that calms themselves down. So the point is that first, when we're under the threat of warfare, our body is going to react appropriately, and that is to become mobilized, and it's a threat reaction. So that is, it's nothing wrong with the body doing that. The issue is, can you or can anyone under those circumstances create windows of time where the threat reaction is dampened? Because unless you do that, it's going to be too metabolically costly to sustain your own health or one's own health under those situations. And that's why this understanding that co-regulation can be useful in calming people down or calming their physiology down to downregulate threat reactions.
Дякую. Ще одне питання. Чи є якісь вправи для стабілізації чи перезавантаження вагусу, крім Sound and Safe Protocol?
Breathing is important. I've been using for myself, I do tilting. I have a table in my basement that basically it's a backswing. You can go down, basically you get to this angle upside down. But if you go swing with it up and down, you're passing blood across the receptors that deal with blood pressure, called baroreceptors, and they trigger both vagal activity and sympathetic activity. So I basically perform every morning neural exercises of this system with the hopeful intention that it will create better flexibility, maintain blood pressure regulation better, and keep our autonomic nervous system healthier. Physical exercise is useful, of course, because it's changing in metabolic activity. Breathing tends to be the most powerful one. Other people, listening has always been involved. People listen to music, and what the Safe and Sound Protocol has done, it's taken music and basically put algorithms on it to amplify the neural challenges to extract certain oscillations of frequencies. So it basically builds on our own history as humans of the importance of music in calming us down. So we can think of listening to music as also a useful process.
Дякую. І останнє питання. Чому є таким важливим сон для вагусу?
Sleep. Sleep is when our body is not under threat, and we're basically it enables the body to literally reset itself on different levels. So it's not, we can't say it's important for the vagus. Sleep is important for our whole body, and I always like to think of sleep as a core product of our autonomic nervous system. So if you have sleep disturbances, you're going to have atypical autonomic regulation. So they're important things. It's even a reset for some of the cortical activity that's going on. So it's not just sleep and we're just sitting there. Right? There's a lot of things going on, including dreaming and the quiet sleep, which is really where our body is doing a lot of rejuvenation. So it's optimizing what the term is. It's optimizing homeostatic functions, which would be simply stated health, growth, and restoration. It's enabling our body to restore itself. I would also say that often people feel like they're not getting sleep when they actually are, because the context that you're in may not be, you may think you're not sleeping well. So for me, I have one of these devices, it's a Fitbit, and I can actually see my sleep architecture. So it tells me that even though psychologically I think I should stay in bed, I've actually gotten enough sleep. And it's been very helpful for me. If I didn't know that I had slept, I'd be complaining that I haven't been sleeping well.
Дякуємо, Стівене, за таке чудове інтерв'ю. Дякуємо, що ви приділили час. Дякуємо, що ви приділили час нам, нашим колегам. Ви підтримали нас, так докладно відповіли на всі запитання, надіслали завчасно достатній масив інформації. Ми, звісно ж, сподіваємося і на подальшу вашу підтримку наших українських спеціалістів, нашої країни, і на подальшу взаємодію з вами.
I look forward to it, and I really wish the best, and I'm really hopeful for a good outcome. And we all are very proud and connected to what's going on in the Ukraine, and so my heart's with you.
Дякуємо.
Дякуємо вам і найкраще вам побажання.
Thank you so much.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Дякую.
Going to say goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Дякую.
Дякую.
Дякую. До побачення.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Володимире, тобі також дякуємо дуже.
Ігор, спасибо вам.
Запрошуйте ще спеціалістів таких.
Дякую.
Дякую.
Дякуємо. Дякую за організацію. Прекрасно.
Дякуємо Ірині за переклад. Тихо, спокійно.